Welcome the selected ones. The instant you stop being exploited, they begin labeling you difficult, but most likely someone who has finally found their own peace. Allow me to tell you a fact. Most individuals will never confess it aloud. People do not adore you for who you are. They adore you because of how much of yourself you're prepared to give up and choose one. Let's be really honest. You've been handing out free royalty energy samples in a market rife with counterfeit souls, while you were out here bleeding compassion. Some people filled their glasses with your compassion and called it their own wine. They did not just take advantage. They made you their emotional Amazon Prime. There was no thank you for the prompt delivery. God forbid you run out of stock for a day. But guess what? The season is over. You are no longer a healing station for damaged individuals who refuse to modify their habits. You're done being the generator in a blackout zone filled with folks who are too lazy to pay their electricity bill. This is not only about establishing boundaries. This is about reversing roles. Because if they help shatter your cup, they will no longer be able to drink from it. So take a big breath, sit back, and collect your crown off the floor. Because today we're pulling down the altar they erected with your self-worth, and your chosen one is finally walking out of the temple. Let's go. First and foremost, they did not love you. They observed you. They did not love you. They observed you. That is the hard truth. Most selected ones need years to understand they were not accepted for their soul. You were noted for your vigor. You were never in an equal relationship. You were the experiment, the muse, and the entry point. While you believed you were creating something genuine, they were taking notes and altering their masks to learn about your triggers, compassion limitations, and patience threshold. They were not interested in loving you. They wanted to decode you. And then they figured you out. That's when the manipulation began. They know just how to achieve their goals without seeming to be villains. They echoed your language, hurts, and ideals. They used your light to see, your depth to appear intelligent, and your warmth to hide their objectives. And since you were honest, you assumed they were too. But they never wanted to connect. It was about control. And the better they knew you, the more strategic their exploitation got. The worst thing is that you mistaken their attentiveness for closeness. You believed being studied meant being liked. You assumed their interest meant they cared. However, it wasn't about caring. It was about calculating. They wanted to understand how you worked so they could take over the system. You were walking source code, and they were attempting to alter the software to meet their requirements. That's why they were so upset when you drew away. The minute you became unpredictable, they lost control. They were not grieving your death. They were worried about losing access to what you provided. This is the type of knowledge that brings clarity rather than closure. And now that you see it, you don't have to explain it to them again. Another chat or second of your spirit. They did not love you. They observed you. However, classes were dismissed. Second, your empathy was a narcotic, and they were hooked. Your empathy was never just politeness toward them. It was a drug. They were hooked. Addicted. How you forgave. The way you provided others opportunities, even if they did not earn it. It was how you comprehended things no one ever uttered aloud that gave them their high. And, like any junkie, they were ungrateful for the supply. They were entitled to it. They came back every time they made a mistake, knowing you'd be there, cleaning up the mess, and finding some deeper explanation to justify their conduct to them. That was your role. You were always their emotional recovery center. Life humbled them. They returned to your energy to refresh rather than alter. They needed a dose of your sympathy to feel good about themselves. And the strange thing is, they never wanted to heal. Healing would imply that they would no longer need your assistance, which they like. It made them feel strong to know that they could break apart, vanish, and insult you while still receiving your affection. Maintain access to your energy. Still do your best, even after they'd given you their worst. But they didn't expect you to really see it. To eventually wake up and understand that empathy isn't meant to be a free-for-all, and that not everyone deserves access to your soul. That just because you understand someone else's anguish does not mean you should continue to allow them to create your own. That is the withdrawal they are experiencing right now. It is not love that they miss. It's about comfort. It's the emotional anesthetic you've supplied. It's the element you introduced into their pandemonium. They're calling you chilly now that the drug's gone. But you aren't chilly. You are clean. And now they're shaking, desperately phoning and apologizing. But it is not real. It's merely symptoms. They aren't seeking for change. They are seeking for a replenishment. However, this time, the pharmacy is closed. Number 3, they did not take your time. They stole your future. They did not just squander your time. They have seized your future. That is the part that hurts the most. You believed you were creating a life together, mending and developing alongside one another. But they were never interested in developing with you. They were holding you back, postponing your revolution, diverting you just enough so you didn't understand how close you were to breaking free, moving into something bigger. They were not a partner. They were a diversion. Every time you became stronger, clearer, or more focused, they'd yank you back into the fog. Drama, guilt, sabotage, whatever it needed to slow you down. Because they knew where you were going. They saw your magnificence before you realized what it was. And this scared them. Your healing revealed their reluctance to develop. Your light amplified their shadows. They made it their job to keep you little, not by force, but via emotional manipulation. They tapped into your devotion, empathy, and dread of being alone. It was not arbitrary. It was calculated. They didn't want you to wake up and know how much time you'd spent tending to their wounds. They didn't want you to realize that you were continuously putting your mission on hold in order to preserve the peace. But now, the pause button is currently broken. Now you're back on track, and they're watching from behind. It is not just about moving on. It's about taking back what they took while seeming to care. The aspirations you buried, the objectives you postponed, the years you spent doubting yourself because they made you feel like too much. That is what you are taking back now. And no, you aren't bitter. You know you've outgrown the trap. And although they believed they had stopped you for good, all they did was postpone the inevitable. You have reclaimed control of your future. And this time, no one is holding the map at you. Number 4, you were the electrical grid. They simply plugged in. They never arrived with their own strength. They arrived with empty batteries and a grin. Initially, it seemed to be love. It seemed to be support. They reflected your interests, aspirations, and language. And you mistaken this for alignment. But what they were actually doing was connecting to your energy source. You were the one who created the warmth, creativity, vision, and emotional safety. They just tapped in and made it seem reciprocal. It was not. You'd be bursting with ideas, and they'd instantly get drive. You'd be focused on growth, and they'd suddenly become ambitious. But as soon as you were exhausted, they vanished since they weren't truly developing anything with you. They were feeding off of what you had previously built. You were the fire, and others were just accumulating heat. Did you notice how they only showed up when things were going good for you? You'd win, and then they'd be close. You had reached a low point, and they were suddenly busy. They were not there for you. They were there for the light and the most twisted aspect. They'd behave as if they were doing you a favor, as if their presence were a godsend. However, in actuality, your soul was the only thing driving the link. They packed just emotional extension cables and a decent disguise. But you eventually pulled the plug, and suddenly the stillness is deafening. The phone calls ceased. The energy moved. They're scurrying, not because they miss you, but because they really miss what you provided for them. You were the driving force behind their feeling of purpose and their transient confidence. Now that you are inaccessible, they realize they never had any power of their own. The blackout you're hearing is the result of their supply running out. They were never autonomous. They were never as powerful or focused as they claimed. And without your current, they don't know how to operate. And this is no longer your concern. Number 5, you outgrown their manipulation script. They followed a formula, a routine, repeating the same phrases, guilt trips, silent treatments, and emotional threats. They repeated it like a script, knowing it would work every time. For a time, it did. Because you cared. You loved sincerely. You wanted to think that they would change. So you performed your role. They tugged the strings, and you replied. They twisted your words, and you found yourself apologizing for something they had done. They'd cause mayhem, and then portray themselves as the victim. You were trapped in a production for which you had not auditioned. But suddenly something changed. You gradually, painfully, began to see the pattern. For what? It was a performance. Not true affection, not true respect, but manipulation. Dressed up in worry. You saw that whenever you placed a barrier, they panicked. How? Every time you paused to think, they accused you of being selfish. You saw how they wanted you to be confused so they could feel in charge. And once you realized the techniques, they lost their effectiveness. You've stopped responding. You've stopped explaining. You stopped defending your sentiments. And that's when everything changed. Because they weren't prepared for the version of you that didn't believe the deception. You were not triggered. You remained unaffected. You were not explaining. You were exciting. They had no script for it. You have outgrown the stage. You stopped performing the part of the understanding person. Forgive her, the emotional sponge. You stopped allowing them to dictate your feelings. When you went away, the crowd noticed. They saw the manipulator exposed. No more cheers, only stillness and uncomfortable glances. The magic trick failed. Now they're looking for a new act, a new audience. However, no two hits are same. Because the fact is that they never wielded actual authority. They had just practiced control. And you? You've gone off their stage permanently. Number 6. You aren't simply saying no. You are undermining their control mechanism. You are saying no. They can now sense the difference. This is no longer merely a barrier. It disrupts their whole system. You used to be the one they could rely on to bend, give in, and compromise in the cause of peace. You were predictable, and they based their control on it. Your guilt was their leverage. Your empathy was their backdoor. But now you're shutting everything down. You have become illegible. That's terrible for those who only knew how to work while they were tugging your strings. They weren't expecting your no to come with peace. They anticipated reaction, explanations, and maybe a collapse. Instead, they get stillness and clarity. And this disrupts their programming since their power was never derived from who they were. It sprang from their ability to maintain control over who you were. And now, without access to your emotional dashboard, they're acting like a system that has lost its mainframe. It's not simply that you're unavailable. It is about you developing immunity. You don't react to guilt trips anymore. You do not fall for the weeping. You don't rush to repair what they broke. That calm, detached knowledge you provide, that's psychological warfare for a manipulator. It's analogous to taking the battery out of their remote control. It is not simply rejection. It's a separation. They don't know what to do without access. They're discovering they never really knew you. They just knew how to manipulate you. And now that you're out of reach, they're stuck standing in front of a closed door, using all their old techniques. Completely pointless. You have become a programmable unreachable. Not because you're chilly, but because you now understand what they're doing. Understanding is power. You aren't simply guarding your peace. You are erasing the complete program that they used to run on. And that is why they are spiraling. Number 7. Your yes was a contract. They had chosen grace as their default option. You never said yes casually. It carried weight. You consistently agreed, showed up, and offered grace. You weren't just being polite. You were making a spiritual contract, a profound, unwritten pact that said, I see your flaws, but I choose to love you regardless. I see your mess, yet I will still make place for you. That's sort of it. Yes, it was an uncommon money, priceless, but they handled it as if it were disposable. They assumed your elegance was limitless. They took your kindness for weakness. They continued returning, removing more, providing less, and violating the conditions of the deal each time. And you still provided them the opportunity to make things right. Not because you were naive, but because you were true to your heart. You meant everything. Yes, you went all in. They were not. They misused the contract. They defaulted repeatedly. And now the karmic court is open. Grace was revoked. Everything they got from you, including your loyalty, energy, tranquility, and presence is being returned. Not because you're being petty, but because the spiritual overdraft has reached its maximum. You provided opportunities like oxygen, but they treated them like spare change. Now, the divine system is balancing the books. They got away with manipulating for so long because they were benefiting from your positive karma. But the account is frozen, and you are not resentful. You are merely no longer the bank. You are not pursuing. You are not repairing. You are not pleading with anybody to recognize the worth of what you provided. You're simply standing there, watching the repossession unfold. Everything they constructed with your elegance is falling. The phony confidence, the stolen tranquility, the connections they exploited your life to maintain. It's all happening because spiritual contracts may not have documentation, but they do have repercussions. And now you aren't the one begging. You are the bailiff at the door. Finally, I am calm, focused, and done. Number 8. They needed a mirror. You become a menace instead. They did not want your honesty. They wanted your agreement. They were not aiming for expansion. They were hunting for an echo, something to bounce their illusions off of and have them return intact. But you did not reflect back the picture they constructed. You mirrored back the reality you saw throughout the deed. You pointed out the inconsistencies. You questioned what did not add up. And 4 individuals are hooked to the mask. That level of clarity is hazardous. Initially, they were attracted to your brightness. They stated things like, "You are different. You see things that no one else does. You simply understand me." But they knew your light was more than simply pleasant. It was revealing. They turned. You were suddenly too passionate, too sensitive, and too much. They wanted your opinion, but only if it made them feel comfortable. They saw you as a danger the minute you began to question the myths they had been fed. You did not assault them. You just stopped engaging in the delusion. You stopped laughing at the falsehoods. You stopped pretending that dysfunction was normal. You stopped reducing your frequency to match theirs. And it was enough to insult them. Because reality does not feel helpful to individuals who are delusional. It has a negative vibe about it. And rather than confront themselves, they chose to assault the mirror. That's why they distorted your personality. That's why they told everyone you had changed. That's why they attempted to make others believe you were cold or haughty. It was all a projection. You were not dangerous. You were just honest. And your candor revealed how false everything around them had become. Instead of rising to confront the reality, they attempted to drag you down to match the falsehood. However, the selected do not beg to be understood by the blind. You do not double your truth to make liars feel secure. You don't dilute your wisdom to fit into little places. You were never meant to reflect the world's ego. You were created to mirror what is genuine. And it wasn't because you were too much for them to handle. It's because their delusion was so weak. Number 9, they are not sorry. They're worried about losing access. They're not apologizing. Not really. They don't feel sorrow or regret for the harm they caused. It's a panic. Panic because the technique they used to control you, siphoning your energy and bending your will, has failed. They're scurrying because of the entry point they had, which allowed them to press your buttons, guilt you into submission, or pull you back when you attempted to escape. That door is slammed shut, which scares them. They don't regret the bridge they torched. They regret the loss of the link that allowed them to keep you on their leash. They do not apologize because they are really sorry. They calculate their next move. Every call, message, and gesture of concern is merely another effort to hack back in, retake control, and uncover the previously exploited vulnerability. But this time, things are different. You're not reacting in the same way you used to. You aren't responding. You aren't bending. This deviates from their usual strategy. What you're experiencing right now is withdrawal, similar to an addict going through detox. The want to reconnect with your energy, time, and forgiveness is strong. However, unlike previously, the circuits are down. Your borders are firewalls. Your no is a locked gate. You rewired your system, so they can't get in. You become unhackable. So all the tales you hear are not apologies. They are terror masked as regret. It's their survival mode taking over, not their conscience. Recognizing the difference is empowering, because once you realize it's terror, not sympathy, you don't feel forced to give in. You stop mistaking desperation for change. They lost access, and hence their authority. And there is just where you wanted it to be all along. Number 10, your survival mode was an opportunity. They did not admire your strength. They admired your survival instincts while you were wounded and defenseless, battling merely to keep your head above water. You were their ideal source. You gave when you had nothing more to offer. You came up despite the flaws, regardless of the discomfort, regardless of tiredness. And they soaked it all up since it was not strength for them. It was an opportunity, an open door for more. Inquire further. Expect more and never give back. They commended you for your strength or resilience. But what they truly meant was that they admired how you supported their weight on top of your own. Your survival mode helped people feel safe because it kept things predictable. They knew you'd return their calls, forgive their faults, and maintain the peace even if it cost you everything. They didn't want you to thrive. They wanted you to survive long enough to keep the lights on for their needs. But here's the reality, which cuts through the cacophony. Your healing scares them because it implies limits. Healing entails saying no when you used to answer yes. Healing entails regaining your time, energy, and voice. Healing implies you're no longer a reliable backup for their turmoil. Your transformation is more than simply growth. It threatens their whole dynamic. When you begin actually recovering, the roles reverse. They can no longer depend on your survival mode to bear their weight. Suddenly, they are exposed. Suddenly, the powerful person they praised is no longer accessible. And instead of stepping up and acknowledging your progress, they leave because your recovery necessitates responsibility. It needs change, and they're not prepared for it. You are healing is a proclamation. You're done being their safety net. You're done being their emotional storehouse. You are done living on shreds of their approval. And the truth, that's what makes them flee. Because for the first time, you are not just surviving. You are prospering. And it is a game changer. A number. Your stillness was not calm. It was repression. For a long time, you were taught that quiet meant strength. Remain calm. They advised me not to create any waves. Keep the peace. So you swallowed your reality, masked your agony, and pushed your demands to the background. But there is quiet. It wasn't peaceful. It was repression. You were not strong. You were involved in your own erasure. You became a silent witness of your own misery, believing you were protecting yourself or others. But in reality, you were hiding behind a mask, allowing them to maintain power. They preferred it that way. Your quiet became their playground. It allowed them to violate borders, manipulate, and gaslight without being challenged. You were there, providing a secure area to act out without fear of repercussions. Because your voice was hidden away, held prisoner by dread, shame, or mistrust. It wasn't about power. It was permission. Allow them to regard you as less than and rewrite your narrative. To portray you as the issue because you dared to speak out. But suddenly the stillness is broken. Your voice is no longer a whisper. It is a roar. It is raw and censored and unapologetic. You are not reading poetry to heal wounds. You are issuing indictments that demand responsibility. Your remarks highlight trends, point out falsehoods, and refuse to allow the narrative be taken again. This is not about being polite or preserving the peace. It's about recovering your identity, space, and power. The calm compliance is gone. You're not just background noise. They're the ones losing their audience. Your voice, which was previously muffled and stifled, has now become their reckoning. This time, it isn't about forgiving or forgetting. It is about ensuring that the harm is identified, named, and prevented. Because your quiet was not strength. They filled the void with control. Now that vacuum is filled, and you're the one with the microphone. A number. They called you too much because you saw so much. They tagged you excessively, as if it were a defect, as if your consciousness was a problem to be solved. But you were not too much. You were too alert, too sensitive to the undercurrents, too tuned into the unseen messages to shop, to be duped by surface-level charm or fake smiles. Others overlooked or were ignorant to the hesitancy in their voice and the contradiction in their behavior, but you saw it. The hidden warfare that go on behind polite discussions. Your intuition was not a curse. That was your superpower. Because while they were busy playing parts, telling tales, and hiding behind masks, you were reading the script from the shadows. You saw the irregularities. You could feel the strain they attempted to hide. You've linked the dots. They thought nobody would notice. It made you dangerous. Not because you intended to harm anybody, but because the truth poses a challenge to those who feed on falsehood. That's why they dreaded you. Not because you were loud or passionate, but because you were straightforward. You could disassemble their stories with a look. You made a man their life without even raising your voice. You weren't extravagant. You were solidly entrenched in something genuine, whilst others were floating on delusions. With that clarity, you were the one they couldn't control, the one they couldn't mute. So, when they stated you were too much, they actually meant they were too terrified. They're afraid you'll reveal what they've been trying to hide. They were afraid that your sharpness would tear through their carefully built facade. You were not the issue. You were the answer they didn't want to confront. That's precisely why they pushed back. You did not overstep. You were able to see everything. That website served as a mirror. They could not bear to investigate. A number. You are not burning bridges. You're burning tunnels. This isn't just a casual "see you later" or a silent departure. You're not just walking away from them. You are a racer. Every hidden path they created to go back into your reality. They weren't simply invited. They discovered underground tunnels, back doors, and shortcuts to reach you without authorization. Now you're not just closing the door. You're burning those tunnels on fire. Every method they do to manipulate, gaslight, or control you is failing. They flourished in the shadows, sneaking in when you were not looking, making a deal behind your back, taking without asking. But you've had enough of them playing hide and seek with your energy and trust. This is an extraction operation, not a retreat. You're destroying the infrastructure that allowed them to cross your borders. It is not petty vengeance. It is recovering sovereignty. You're regaining the map to your life and destroying every shortcut they used. No more covert meetings or surprise assaults disguised as pleasant visits. No more unauthorized access to your item. You're making sure their next effort to return is greeted with rubble and ash. This is why they're panicking. They're accustomed to sliding through crevices, exploiting fractures, and weaving through tunnels you didn't realize existed. However, there is now only one way in, and it is via the front gate that you control. No more infiltration or stealthy invasions. You are not burning bridges. You're burning tunnels. The bridges are still there for those who sincerely respect your boundaries. But the tunnels are gone, demolished, and burnt. Because you are not done with them. You're done with their whole strategy of slipping back in. It's a new age, one in which you manage who has access. Your peace is not a playground, and you are not just protecting the perimeter. A number. You aren't done being utilized. You are becoming unapproachable to manipulators. You aren't done being utilized. You are becoming a force that they can no longer contain. It's not about putting up scalable walls or pickable doors. It's about altering your whole presence so that manipulators are unaware you exist. Your energy no longer broadcasts simple targets or emotional ATMs. Instead, it transmits a clear, unmistakable signal. Sovereignty. You are not open for the season. You are a fortress. They do not have the code to. This metamorphosis does not stem from bitterness or solitude. It stems from profound self-esteem and unwavering clarity. You no longer send SOS signals to the spiritually bankrupt because you have entirely tuned them out. Their manipulations, gimmicks, and emotional blackmail bounce off of you like rain on a shield. They can't see your weakness because you don't keep it where they can find it. You've progressed beyond your previous role as a haven for the lost and manipulative. You are now a closed chapter for people who do not walk. They don't get the joy of deciphering your emotions, using your generosity as leverage, or creeping in under the radar. You have become illegible, like a conundrum. They will never discover the missing parts. You thwart their efforts to comprehend or control you. Being unapproachable should not imply arrogance or shutting people away. It is about recovering your place so completely that it cannot be utilized again. You've established yourself as a presence worthy of respect just by existing. The manipulators sense it. They know that no matter how hard they try, you are out of grasp. You're unattainable, impenetrable, and totally out of their league. You aren't done being utilized. You are redefining the rules of interaction. And from now on, only those who come with honesty and sincerity shall pass. You've progressed from being a tool to a titan in your own tale. It's not simply about saying no anymore. It's about regaining every ounce of your power and refusing to give it up to anybody who views you as a resource to be abused. The period of being exploited, drained, and silenced has finally ended. You're no longer a silent background character in someone else's narrative. You're the director, lead, and producer of your life's masterpiece. This shift is about more than simply self-protection. It's about acknowledging the great fortitude required to get here. Battles waged in quiet, wounds concealed, and resilience built amid fire. Every barrier you create, tunnel you burn, and truth you declare out is a victory lap for your soul. Remember, the power you wield is not for everyone. It is not a beacon for people trapped in manipulation or control. It's a stronghold for your spirit and a beacon for those who walk with honor. You're done being used. Yes, but more importantly, you're done accepting anything less than your complete, unabashed sovereignty. So, hold your head high. Maintain a tough stance. Understand that what you've created inside yourself is unshakable, indestructible, and unmistakably you. The world may want to get in, but you now have the keys. The only people welcomed inside are those who provide honesty, respect, and genuine connection. You aren't done being utilized. You're done playing little. This is your rise. This is your reclaiming. And it is nothing short of incredible. If this message spoke to you, don't forget to subscribe and join our community, where we value empowerment and truth. Like the video. If you're ready to step into your power, leave a comment below with your story or views. I want to hear from you. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, please forward it to them. Together, we become stronger. Thank you for being here. Let us keep going ahead. Unstoppable and unbreakable. God bless you.